So do we take care of the blur? Some of you are asking about the blur. Hey, and if you can't see the image fully, I want to encourage you. We'll put the link up to these images that you can go over to Gluten Free Society and you can get access to these images and you can look at them a lot more closely without the blur if you had blur on your screen. I've heard that if you wear sunglasses, you will not get vitamin D, but I've also heard you absorb vitamin D through your skin. Either true or one or both. No, so sunglasses has nothing to do with vitamin D unless you're wearing like these massive sunglasses that cover most of your face. It's skin is what produces vitamin D, the cholesterol in your skin directly. Sunglasses, though, will prevent you from adequately producing melatonin and also serotonin. So it's think of the sunglasses as preventing melatonin and serotonin. Think of the skin and covering the skin as reducing your ability to produce vitamin D. Let's see, Amelie says, hi, Dr. Osborne, my friend has severe adult asthma and the doctor advised the only way to prevent fibrosis of the lungs is daily steroid spray. Is there other help? Yeah, tons of it. Fibrosis is an autoimmune process, Amelie, so your friend needs to understand that there are four primary triggers of an autoimmune process. One of them is the wrong food, so eating foods that your body's reactive to. Another family of triggers is chemical exposures. Oftentimes with fibrosis, one of the chemical triggers I see that's frequent is mycotoxin or mold exposure. Another family of those triggers happens to be the microbiome itself, so like microbial imbalance, and that can be measured. And then the last is nutritional deficits. Vitamin and mineral deficiencies can also be a major trigger. So if your friend hasn't had those things checked out, really I would encourage you to encourage her to work with a doctor who can measure those things consistently to help give her some guidance on the behavioral changes that she can modify and make. Is it true that it helps your eyesight if you go out and look at it in the morning before it comes up? You talking about looking at the sun? No, not to my knowledge. There's no truth in looking directly at the sun. I would say quite the opposite. Gluten and grain-free for 3 weeks. Before this, why did my heart rate go up so high when I was out in the sun for more than 10 minutes? Because your body was probably a little bit overwhelmed. So this is a common thing that people think they're allergic to sunshine or that they can't tolerate the sunshine. So sunshine, it's one of those things that creates what's known as a hormetic effect or a hormetic impact. And that means that with the sun, right, because what is it? It's radiation. It's light waves that emit radiation that hit your body. And as your body is exposed to that radiation, if your body's not adept or capable of handling radiation, then you'll actually have a negative reaction to sun. And this is what we see, especially this is true when the diet is bad. When the diet causes stress and free radical formation, your ability to tolerate sun will be diminished. And that's because your body is trying to deal and cope with these stresses. And now you're adding an irradiative stress in, and so it can't handle it. It's already overwhelmed. So the issue here is, this is why it's so important to change the diet. There have actually been studies done in orbit of the Earth. So one of the studies, I was at a space conference one year, and the researchers were reporting on their work on mice. And so what they were doing is they took different groups of mice and exposed them to solar radiation without the Earth's atmosphere in place, right? And so what happened is they fed one group of mice basically a sugar water diet, and they fed another group of mice berries, a mixture of different berries, including blackberries and blueberries and raspberries. And what they found is that the group of mice that were given berries in their diet, the photopigments in the berries actually, they have digested, absorbed them, and they used them to protect themselves from radiation. So it was the actual food in the diet, it was the quality of the diet that provided plant nutrients that protected their skin, their bodies from the radiative damage. The mice that ate sugar water developed cancers. So in that regard, if you take that, and again, we can't always extrapolate animals to humans in terms of exact studies, but we do have studies that show that when humans eat junk food, they tend to be more affected in a negative way by the sun, where when they eat high quality foods with lots of photopigments from the healthy whole foods that they're eating. So you definitely want to keep that in mind. If you've experienced that going gluten-free, it's probably because you took away the stress and the inflammation of the gluten. Your body was more capable of getting sunshine. Okay. Yeah, I get it. So ridiculous how they have everybody convinced they're going to die from something. It makes me so angry. I can't agree more. I think if you look at all the advice, all the governmental advice over the last 100 years, right? Don't eat butter, real butter, eat fake butter called margarine. That's better for you, right? That was wrong. Don't eat sugar, not that sugar's good for you. Let's eat processed, chemically chlorinated sugar, or let's eat an artificial amino acid that damages your nerves but tastes sweet, right? Those were wrong. Look at hydrogenated fat. Let's use hydrogenated fat, and let's add hydrogen to corn oil and soy oil. That's better for you than real healthy whole foods. Like all the health advice, look at the food guide pyramid. It had sugar on the food guide pyramid itself. Sugar was one of the groups. Grain was the base of the food guide pyramid. Like if you look at all the advice that we've been given from the government, it's usually wrong. Right? I mean, governments, just because they're governments, don't make them right. And I think that's where a lot of people, they put a lot of faith and trust into an entity because there's a perceived benevolence to that entity. But in reality, that entity is run by a bunch of, well, I'm just going to say it like it is. If you look at the doctors and you look at the health experts that are in government, the reason they're in government is because they couldn't make it in private practice. They couldn't succeed in the real world helping anybody be successful in their health, so they had to go work for the government. So who we're employing with our tax dollars are a bunch of mediocre morons, again, my opinion, who don't know anything about health. And so most of the advice that they're giving is wrong. Right? And nobody gets to hold them accountable because who's going to hold anyone accountable? Nobody's going to go to jail for saying avoid the sun because it causes skin cancer, because everybody's saying it in unison and all of them are wrong. And just because massive quantities of people are wrong doesn't make them right. And I think we learned that with these last 2 years of behaviors and actions, globally speaking. I'm curious if you know anything about geoengineering. They admit to, well, let's not get into that. That's not, we don't know enough about geoengineering and weather manipulation and modification. We know it's being done, but how and to what extent that impacts people's health, in my opinion, it hasn't been thoroughly enough studied to make a bunch of claims. Are liver spots a cause of too much sun or too little sun? Liver spots are a cause of liver struggling, and your liver struggling. It's not that liver spots are caused by the sun, it's that they show up and they're more, they darken up when you do get sun exposure. But liver spots are just that. It's when your liver's struggling and your skin is having to do some of the work, and that'll show up as liver spots. What about melasma? Still avoid sunscreen? Is there anything else to do to prevent worsening of melasma? My experience with melasma is that a lot of times when people change their lifestyle and their diet, they don't have to so much worry about progressive or aggressive melasma in the skin. So again, I don't know where you're at with your diet and to what regard you've made any changes, but I would suggest you dial that in. Coconut oil for skin lotion and modest sun protection, SPF 2. You know, I'm not a big fan of any oil for sun protection. I think the best sun protection, if you go get sun, and if you need protection after, put some clothes and a hat on. I think those are better levels of protection than rubbing most of those oils. I mean, SPF 2 is not going to do much. My boss never sunbathed and died of melanoma of the heart. Well, let's see. Yeah, so there you go. My boss never sunbathed and died of melanoma of the heart. I try to get 20 minutes of sun at noon and never wear sunscreen. Is there a safe way for me to get a tan? I never wear sunscreen. I hate how it feels on my skin. Yeah, I think the safe way to get a tan is slow, steady wins the race, just like anything else with exercise or with with any aspect in life. Is you do it consistently over time, but you don't do it in such an excess that it creates a problem, and you don't do it to such a small amount that it doesn't create a benefit. You've got to go kind of in the middle. And again, that is different for different people's skin types. Do I need to be in the sun or just outside? I dislike the sun very much. Well, for the vitamin D impact, it's good to be direct, have some direct sun, but you don't have to be in the direct noon sun. Again, you can still make vitamin D without having to be in the direct sun at the hottest time of the day. As far as the melatonin and the cortisol are concerned, you can just be outside. You don't have to be in the direct sun because the light's still going to get and reach your eyes. Should my husband avoid the sun on his face since he just had Mohs surgery to remove basal cell carcinoma on his cheek? Yeah, let him heal first. You don't want to go out there and hammer him with sunlight now. Let his skin heal up. If he's wearing, I wouldn't say he needs to wear sunscreen if he's just going outside for a short time. A hat's not a bad idea, but let that surgical incision heal. I take 3,000 milligrams of your liquid vitamin D. It has stopped my hair from falling out and seems to help with sleep and mood, but I'm wondering why it constipates me. I have a friend that has the same problem. You might be reactive to the actual oil, the emulsification, Barb, and the vitamin D itself. You might try, instead of using depending on which one, I have 3 different options for vitamin D, but you might try my Ultra D with K in powdered form if the oil version is constipating you. Let's see, I've been gluten and grain free. Oh, let's see, did I get that one already? Yeah, let's go down on the left. I wear sunscreen here in Florida. Is that bad? I think it depends on the context of when you're wearing and how long and whether or not you always wear sunscreen. Look, my advice on sunscreen is if you're going to be outside, be outside. Don't lather up with sunscreen, be outside. But if you're going to be outside for a prolonged period of time where you run the risk of getting a sunburn, that's when you could apply. Again, I prefer having you apply clothing as opposed to sunscreen. Put some clothing on that has protection from the UV light and maybe wear a hat as opposed to slathering, again, a bunch of toxic petro-based chemicals and other metals that have known potential for carcinogenic effects. I mean, a lot of the sunscreens today have known carcinogens in them. What kind of sense does that make to rub that all over your body? Your skin's an organ and it absorbs too. So what you put on it should be, you should discern with intelligence that the ingredients are not bad for you. And that again is where, look at that ingredient. The sun, you just say it like this, the suntan companies, the companies that create suntan lotion, or rather, let's just say sun protection lotion, are owned by pharmacy. I mean, do you trust that group of people with your best interests of your health? Where have they succeeded and not, where have they succeeded in the past, in your opinion and in your experience? And that's a question only you can ask yourself one way or the other, but I don't trust them. I'm not going to use it. So polymorphic light eruption, what's the cause? Is it vitamin B3 or vitamin D or other nutrient deficiency? In my experience, Mandy, it doesn't have to be those two. It can be multiple deficiencies. I see a lot of people that have that type of situation where again, it's not always cut and dry, one or two different deficiencies. Sometimes it's a unique pattern that we find in individuals. What I would encourage you to do is get tested. I wear eyeglasses that darken in the sun when I go for my 30-minute walk. Would sitting in the sun when I'm done help? If so, how long? Yeah, sitting in, again, there's not a time frame so much as it is, if you're talking about getting the sun on your skin, the limitation of your skin is going to be the limiting factor. You don't want to be out there long enough to burn. If you're talking about your eyes, just take your glasses off. Like you mentioned, have a seat, take your glasses off, get 20 minutes or so of sun exposure in that way. Let's go down on the left and also on the right. So the comment was, I have light sensitivity with my fibro, so I need sunglasses. And I would challenge you that you own your fibro, but you shouldn't. Like, you should ask why I have fibro. You don't have light sensitivity because you have fibro. You have fibro, and that comes with light sensitivity. And maybe it's because some of the medicines you're taking to treat your fibro, or maybe it's because you haven't changed diet and adjusted your behavior well enough to overcome the fibro. Fibro, as a disease itself, is, in my experience, curable. You just have to figure out what the triggers are. And so, don't own it, Karen. I would just encourage you not to own the disease. When people say my disease, my fibro, my celiac, my rheumatoid arthritis, my diabetes, what you're really doing is you're taking ownership and you're moving into the house of that disease. It's a psychological thing that if you just change your perspective and say, not my fibro, but say the fibro that racks my body, and then ask the question, what do I need to do? What changes do I need to make so that that's not happening anymore? But don't move into the disease. I have vitiligo and have had lots of sun, so I don't scent to get too much sun because looks too spotty. Yeah, so you also have vitiligo, and so there's a vanity issue at stake. But vitiligo is also an autoimmune disease, much like fibro. And so if you understand what's triggering the vitiligo and you make behavioral changes to overcome it, then it won't be something that you so much are as concerned by. Why is it so common for rashes and autoimmune disease? It's very common for many reasons. One of the reasons is there's intestinal permeability. And so what happens in intestinal permeability or leaky gut is you get bacterial toxins that leak into the bloodstream, into the portal circulation, and they can damage the liver, causing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So those toxins, again, as they bleach through, they damage the liver. When the liver's overstressed, when the liver's overworked, we'll see the rash come out in the skin, because the skin is actually the largest detoxification organ in the body. And so if the liver can't do its work, the skin will try to step in and help it out, and that can manifest as different types of skin inflammatory processes. If you're getting bumps on your arm from being in the sun a lot, it's most likely, Nicole, it's an antioxidant issue that you have. Vitamin C, omega-3 fatty acid deficiencies can create bumps on the arms in that way from sun exposure. So again, I would encourage you to have your vitamin and mineral deficiency status checked to see whether that's happening for you. Let's go down a little bit on the left and on the right. So, question about the best non-toxic sunscreen, the UPF clothing versus lotions with chemicals. I'd go with clothing every time. But you don't necessarily have to get clothing with chemicals. You can get regular clothing. It still will protect you from sun. You don't have to have special SPF clothing. That's become more of a marketing gimmick in recent years. But clothing itself is going to provide protection from the sun. Dermatologist said I have photosensitivity. What does that mean, Grace? That's the question you should ask your dermatologist. What does that mean, photosensitivity? Why? Again, why do I have photosensitivity? Don't just accept, hey, you have X disease. Why? You didn't have it your whole life. It hasn't been there. It hasn't been with you since you came out of the womb. So what is it that's happening in your life, in your behavior, in your diet? It's contributing to your body's inability to respond appropriately to the environment and still protect you, right? Especially to something so inherently beneficial as sunlight. I read that sunglasses protect your eyes from certain conditions later in life. I think most of that is kind of not true, depending on the level of exposure and the length of exposure that you get. There's certainly, again, with sunshine, let's be clear, let's use common sense. I want to encourage any of you, you can't overdo it. So the key is like in many things in life is moderation. You know, you don't go out and bake your eyes in the sun all day, and that, you know, but in that regard, you want to look at it in moderation. Again, your skin toleration is probably a pretty safe bet, you know, as to what your sun tolerance level is. Why am I allergic to the sun? I rush out. I do not use lotions or SPF. I have to slowly reintroduce my skin to the sun every spring. I think you probably have other issues that you're struggling with. If you're again, just like I said earlier, if you're reacting to the sun, you probably got some dietary issues that need to be addressed, because your body is perceiving that sunlight as a hormetic, a stress effect, and that radiation is too much for you to handle. What amount of vitamin D should I take daily? It's different for different people. I would say get your vitamin D levels checked. If they're below 30, then you know you should probably look at, depending on what your medication history is, you'd be plenty safe between 6,000 and 10,000 units a day. But work with your doctor to keep your levels measured. To get your levels up, if you're under 30, anything less really than 6,000 is not going to do very much. It's like spitting on a forest fire. Is it true redheads can make their own vitamin D? Well, remember, we all make our own vitamin D. So yeah, it's true that redheads make vitamin D. We all do. Yeah, you can also eat vitamin D. It's just most people don't like the foods that contain it. I mean, the primary vitamin D containing food is liver. Raise your hand today if you've had a healthy serving of liver. Probably no one's hand in the room goes up, maybe a few. But liver, and I mean, mushrooms can be a source of vitamin D, but you gotta eat an awful lot of that for you to get enough to match the levels, especially if you're trying to dig your way out of an autoimmune hole. How do you maintain a healthy vitamin D level when October to March is cold in Canada? Well, that's a great question, Angela. One of the things that you do is you supplement, and that can be done. You know, in the winter months, you know, I've seen clients be successful supplementing anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 units a day in winter months, getting it checked every 3 or 4 months or so to make sure you're not doing too much. So that's one way to keep your vitamin D levels up. But the other thing that you might consider, look, if you live north of 27 degrees latitude, which Canada certainly qualifies as that, you have to understand that your exposure to sunlight is already going to be diminished. Now, if we look historically at what people did in the winter months, especially before Europeans colonized the United States, is that tribes were migrant. They would go north and south for winter and summer, and so they would move. With the weather, so that well, there were lots of reasons. They were following the food, but in essence, too, by default, they were staying with the sun and the exposure. And so in the winter months, when I've lived, and I used to live a lot further north, I would actually do a tanning bed, but I wouldn't go to a tanning bed to tan. I know a lot of you are thinking, tanning bed, that's crazy. No, tanning beds are UV light exposure that helps your skin produce vitamin D. And if you live 27 degrees north latitude and you get a 6-month long period of winter that's just harsh, 2 to 3 minutes in a tanning bed a couple of times a week could be the thing that keeps you healthier. So don't look at that as necessarily bad. But I'm not talking about the 30-minute sessions to get bronzed up, right? That's not what I mean. I'm talking about small levels of exposure periodically through the winter to help emulate that sunshine, because you're not going to migrate to the south. Now, some of you snowbird, right? A lot of folks in New York snowbird down to Florida in winter months, or snowbird down to Arizona or New Mexico in the winter months for that very reason. Hey, if you've got a functional medicine or health question that you'd like me to answer for you, make sure you send me an email, glutenology@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to create a video answer just for you. Have a great day.